Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome indeed, yes, to another edition of the Mark Moses Show podcast. And we're always broadcasting from the Anidjar and Levine Accident Attorney Studios. Take back control of your life. Calm today. This is key, even on a chilly Wednesday here in January. Yes, 1-800-747-FREE. It's 1-800-747-3733. It's Anidjar and Levine Accident Attorneys. Now, this fine gentleman has been one of the busiest men alive in December and January. He is my great friend, Alex Donno. Does a great job covering the Hurricanes. And, we got much to discuss. How you doing, buddy?
You're right about being busy. I try to put out enough podcasts to cover all the breaking news. And then just on Tuesday alone, you had, Darian Mensah settling with Duke. And then Mensah and Cooper Barkate, his top receiver, visiting Miami. And then Miami also signed a former Florida State defensive back, Conrad Hussey. And then Mensah and Barkate sign at night. So I was, I could not, for the first time in a long time, I was not able to successfully keep up with everything on that day. I had to carry over some of that stuff into Wednesday.
All right, well then let's start with the number one question you've been answering for the last, I'd say, a couple weeks now. How big is this for the offense to add a quarterback and the top wide receiver for the next season?
Yeah, I mean, the wide receiver part, and I'll get to it, feels more like the icing on the cake. But the quarterback part of it, that was very necessary. Of course, Carson Beck was a 1-year thing. He's off to, hopefully he gets an opportunity in the NFL. He's out of eligibility. And, Miami obviously was not super confident in the players behind him being a Miami-level starting quarterback in 2026. I think there are a couple of younger quarterbacks in the room who have potential. Luke Nickel heading into his second year, and Darian Coleman coming in as a true freshman. I think they might have, either of them, future starting quarterback written all over them, but I don't think Mario Cristobal was comfortable in turning over to the offense to anyone remaining in that room. And so Miami had a huge need, Mark. And before they ultimately get Darian Mensah, Miami tried to get Brendan Sorsby, who transferred from Cincinnati, but he landed at Texas Tech very quickly in the process. They tried for Sam Levitt out of Arizona State, and my understanding was they were really close to getting Sam Levitt, but Lane Kiffin really went the extra mile to make sure that Levitt chose LSU, and Miami missed out on that one. They tried to convince Ty Simpson from Alabama not to enter the NFL draft and to come to Miami. He goes to the NFL draft. So you came down to essentially deadline time in the transfer portal, and it looked like Miami was going to be the last person standing in the game of musical chairs and not having a quarterback. And then, Darian Mensah, and it's hard to say, how exactly Mensah decided to enter the portal. I know people assume there was some crazy tampering going on, and I can't say if there was or there wasn't, but I do know it did seem like Mensah was kind of looking for maybe a different situation. He might have had it in his mind a little bit before he did to leave Duke. And so ultimately, I think Mensah, to me, is a better quarterback and probably a better fit at the very least than the guys who turned Miami down. This reminds me a lot of the Penn State coaching search, where it was like a complete cluster after they fired James Franklin, and they were turned down by some people that weren't as good as Matt Campbell, who they ultimately hired. I feel the same way about Miami's quarterback search because, Mensah is someone who, played in the conference at Duke this past season, and, quite frankly, played a lot better than, a lot of his teammates did, which is why even though Duke won the ACC, they had 5 losses, but they had 5 losses despite Mensah throwing just a few yards under 4,000, throwing 34 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions, which is insane. So this is someone who, he can move, he can extend plays, he can run a little bit, super accurate deep ball. And you also bring in the guy who was on the receiving end of a lot of those downfield passes in Cooper Barkate. So it's like Miami needed the quarterback really badly, didn't need the receiver as badly because they have a talented receiver room, but they now have, 2 receivers coming back off of 1,000+ yard seasons with Barkate and with Malachi Tony. So it's a real luxury to have Cooper Barkate as well.
Thank you for that answer. I know you've done radio before. You have answers ready to go. Okay, that was pretty good, Alex Donno. It's all about what ifs. Dude,
Yeah.
if Virginia wins that game, I still feel like Virginia would have made the playoff. And I don't know if Miami's in the playoff. And the guy that made that happen, the door to open for Miami, is now your starting quarterback.
Wow. What a point.
What if I would have told you this at Christmas? This is what would have been happening. Would you say I'm crazy? What would have happened?
Yeah. I mean, it still sounds a little crazy now, even though it's actually true.
It's like, and then wasn't he? So this is what I get confused on. Wasn't he having some NIL deal? Isn't that been kind of like, what's going on here? Like, should he still be at Duke? What's the latest on that?
Yeah, well, that is truly, you could ask 10 different lawyers about that, and not all of them would give you the same answer as to should he still be at Duke. So what? Yeah, so Duke sued him because when he arrived, he transferred 14 months ago or 13 months ago from Tulane to Duke. Yeah. And when he transferred to Duke, they had him, he had to willingly sign it, but he signed a 2-year NIL agreement, right? That agreed he was going to make $8 million total, $4 million for each season, but he signed a 2-year NIL deal. And where it gets very complicated is, and I've talked to lawyers about this over the past week or so. We know the NCAA, as useless as they are, they have gone out of their way to make sure they don't define college athletes as employees. Like, that's something the NCAA wants to avoid, right? They don't want to have to pay benefits. They don't want their players to be able to collectively bargain. So they do not define them as employees. And NIL deals are not really supposed to be pay for play. We all know they kind of are, but they're not supposed to be. So it brings up this crazy legal question that, can an institution actually sign a player to a multi-year NIL deal and keep them in place as if it's an employment deal when the NCAA transfer portal opens up every single year? So the NCAA has a rule that, hey, like, according to their rules, players can become free agents every single year. It used to be twice a year, but they've gone down to one transfer portal, right? So then, Duke and some others that write up these multi-year contracts are trying to circumvent that by saying, well, yeah, I mean, technically the NCAA says you're a free agent every year, but you sign this piece of paper, we say you're not, right? So that's ultimately why Mensah and Duke ended up settling outside of court. And Mensah, we don't know the disclosed figures, but he had to pay, a sum of money. It might be in the 7 figures to Duke. I would assume Miami reimbursed the money that he had to pay to Duke to settle that deal. But I don't think either side, Mark, wanted to take this to court, because from the Duke point of view, they could not be sure that a judge would actually rule to say, hey, this is essentially an employment contract. He cannot leave, right? And I don't think the NCAA wanted a judge to give that ruling, because that opens up a big can of worms. And then, of course, from the Darian Mensah side, what if the judge does say you can't go anywhere else, right? So both sides, I think, had a lot to lose had this gone to court. So they decided to settle behind the scenes, and that's why Mensah became free.
Okay, and non-lawyer questions. Okay, I know. Look, my dad's a lawyer. I didn't want to do it. Okay, I don't want to have these questions either. Okay, I don't want to answer them. We're here with Alex Donno. After what they just accomplished, going on that run, they're in the national title game with a chance to win. And you beat Ohio State. You beat all these big teams. And now you get this quarterback. Are these the biggest expectations you have seen from this program in 20 years going into next fall now?
1,000 times yes. Because the defense should be very good again next year, even though, of course, they lost Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor, but they've got dudes still on that defensive line, and they added Damon Wilson from Missouri at edge, who's like a really good replacement for Bain or Mesidor. The defense should be really good again. Like, the offense should be better. Like, I take nothing away from Carson Beck, and I don't mean this as disrespect to him. I mean this as respect to Mensah, that I think Mensah's got a significantly higher ceiling in Miami's offense than Beck did. With Beck, it's a super high floor because of the way he plays and his experience. But Mensah has a much higher ceiling. Miami returns their entire running back room from last year. They've got a better receiving room than they had a year ago. Once, Malachi Tony in his second year, Barkate comes in. They added a couple of other transfers who had productive seasons last year. So like the team is more talented overall, I think, than it was a year ago. And you think about trying to build on the success and the momentum, like coming into last year, Mark, I never would have imagined Miami would play in the national championship game. Like that was not like a realistic expectation for me. Like a realistic expectation was win 10 or 11 games, get into the playoff. We'll see what happens, right? I did not imagine national title game. But then you head into 2026, an expectation of getting there or at least making a deep run. That kind of becomes the bar now. Like that wasn't, they cleared the bar last year. This year, the bar is significantly higher.
I didn't know if they were going to be in the tournament the morning of the selection committee making
Neither
their.
did
I mean, because you did a great job where it's like for weeks you're like, look, we beat Notre Dame, we should be in the playoff. It's like it was like election day. You were vouching every single day. Please let us in, right? And by the way, Tony, if he was eligible, he'd be a first-round draft pick now. I'm not kidding. He was that dynamic. Do you feel like expectations for him next year are to be the best offensive weapon in college football?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's the type of player that is probably going to appear on some like Heisman Trophy projections because he does so many different things, right? He catches passes, he throws passes, he runs. So yeah, the expectations are super high, and at least like the fact that Miami on paper has so many other talented receivers, that should allow him to be open at least on occasion, right? Because if he was the only weapon, then everybody brackets him and they just challenge everybody else to beat you. But it's like you can only give Tony so much extra attention when you've also got Barkate and you've got Van Drevius Jacobs or Josh Moore. So it's like, I mean, it seems like Tony, and he's a super hardworking guy. Like he does not take his success for granted. Like he's not one of those guys who's got like so many physical gifts, but then he's out partying and drinking and doesn't take care of himself. Like no, he lives a fully football committed life. Like he doesn't he doesn't have too many other distractions. He's fully focused. So I would imagine Tony's going to keep making himself better. And yeah, the expectations for Malachi are super high to have another big year. I mean, he had 1,000-yard season as a true freshman. Theoretically, he should be able to do that every year he's in college.
Okay, I'm going to end with this with you. Again, you're busy. Thanks for doing this with me, Alex Donno. And I know you probably have 75 more podcasts to do after this to break down the new quarterback. Hey, were you devastated they lost that title game? Were you? Like, was Miami fans overall, or were you just happy to be there? That's the question.
It's one of those things where if you told yourself before the season started that, hey, you're going to get all the way to the championship game and you're going to have a final drive with a chance to win it down 6, everyone would have signed up for that, right? I mean, outside of, there's a few programs where like national title was the expectation. Like Ohio State fans were probably like, it's national championship or bust, right? That's not the way reasonable Miami fans felt. So any Miami fan would have signed up for that. But with that said, when you're actually in that moment and you're that close to winning a title and it happens to be in your city and your stadium, it was a gut punch. I think this is one of those situations, Mark, where the disappointment and the sadness is always going to be there, and the what ifs. Like I've replayed that final Miami drive. I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times, where Carson Beck puts more air under the ball, and the ball goes to the pylon, and Keelan Marion catches a touchdown instead of it being an interception. Like I've relived that moment in my mind 1,000 times since that game. So it's disappointing, but you're also correct that the perspective still needs to be there, that this not only was Miami one of the last 2 teams standing, but, a lot of folks before the game, impartial, not Indiana people, Miami people were saying, yeah, Indiana's going to blow them out. Like, they beat Oregon by more than 30 points. They beat Alabama by more than 30 points. It's going to be another 30-point demolition against Miami. And so I'm super proud of the team for physically hanging tough and being right there until the final play. and for showing that they belong on that field. Because I've covered a lot of Miami teams over the years that did not belong anywhere near that championship game. But to be neck and neck with a great team like Indiana and a great coach like Kurt Signetti with under a minute left in the game, I thought was admirable. And I think every Miami fan hopes that was the beginning of the story and not the end of the story.
And look, you know this better than anyone. The idea of Mario, great recruiter, not sure as a coach. Can he win? He answered a lot of questions. He did. And he's right there. And compared to like 2017, the turnover chain type team, that was a one and done. This team is built. I know you have to talk about this for the next 8 months to get ready for a new season. Okay.
Which I love.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. Alex, thank you so much for your help. Appreciate it. Have a great day. All right, man.
I appreciate you, Mark. Have a great day and keep doing your thing, man. You're crushing it.